Focus on that one weakness and then try to improve that. Don't try to improve everything. Just focus on one thing, improve that, and then work on something else.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Struggle Climbing Show. Are you looking to improve your grip strength? Well, you're a rock climber, so I'm assuming the answer is probably yes, and that's why you're tuning into this pro clinic, and boy, does it deliver. I'm so glad that I was able to connect with today's guest, Yves Gravelle, over the computer, because if we had met up in person, we probably would have shaken hands, which is like the universal way to say hi, although we are big fans of fist bumping here in climbing because we're always very protective of our fingers. But I assume that if I were to reach out and shake Yves' hand, he would crush my tiny little pathetic paw within his super strong vice grip mitts, and it would be like that cocktail party nightmare where my hand just like collapses within the hand of somebody else, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I forgot to grip the proper grip strength on this handshake. You know what? I'm bringing a lot of my own insecurities into this opening here. Let's get back on track and talk about Yves Gravelle and his crushing grip strength. Well, you probably know Yves because within the climbing circles, he is a hell of a climber. He's an elite climber, indoors and out, one of the strongest dudes in Canada and just the world for that matter. I certainly don't need to separate it out. But with regards to grip sport, which is like this competition, this competitive world of grip events like axle deadlift and the pinch and the wrist roller and hub lifts and crushing grips and blob lifts and these things that we talk about in this conversation, Yves is absolutely elite. He's a multiple Canadian national grip sport champion, and he really crosses things over. You know, he's a specialist in both, and a lot of this conversation focuses on how grip sport training, and also by extension, something that he's really into right now, which is arm wrestling, can carry over into climbing. And maybe just as importantly, what doesn't carry over? What wouldn't be worth our time as climbers because we have a finite amount of time to train, not just our grip, our strength, our hangboarding type stuff, but also practicing the sport that we love so much and getting out on the wall or out on rock. And Yves brings a really cool perspective with regard to what he feels could be difference makers in our climbing and also what would not be worth our time. So this is a fantastic pro clinic. I really enjoyed talking with Yves. I'm going to put some links in the show notes for you to check out. And also, if you are a Patreon supporter, thank you, shout out. You can see the full video of this conversation where Yves kind of demonstrates different like wrist and hand positions and also even shows us some of his implements. So without further ado, let's crush with Yves Gravelle. Good morning. Where are you at?
I'm in Ottawa, Canada. So on the East Coast. You're in New York, I saw. Is it New York?
Yeah, time zone. I'm in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky. But yeah, Eastern time zone. How you doing this morning?
I'm good. Busy with work and stuff, but yeah, it's good. Just getting ready for arm wrestling competitions. I'm doing like North American Championships in 2 weeks.
So much that I'm excited to explore with you, but because the arm wrestling comp is only a couple weeks out here, I'd like to just maybe dip into that world for a second because I'm not super familiar with it. One of my friends is like pretty psyched on like arm wrestling. And so like every once in a while he'll show me like proper form and that kind of thing. And so how much is it, this is kind of like the climber question, like what's the balance between strength and technique when it comes to arm wrestling?
Arm wrestling. So I think strength plays an important, like obviously I'm new to it too. Like I've been doing it for four months. So I'm pretty new. I think it is important. It's gonna help out for sure. But the technique aspect is really high. It's kind of like climbing. I would say it's very similar to climbing. Obviously, if you're strong, it's gonna help a lot in a lot of situations. But if you're a better technician, like it's just like in terms of leverage and technique, and it's a lot like fighting, a little bit like a martial arts too. There's like a lot of counters for something. So if someone does something, there's usually a response to that specific move. So it's almost a game of tic-tac-toe too at the same time. It's like, okay, what is he doing and how is he setting up? So you have to have a really high level of awareness too on what's happening like on the table and and try to disguise a little bit your technique. It's kind of like lots like fighting, I guess. Like if you were doing a punch or something like that, you can't make it seem that it's like you're doing this or else like becomes really easy. Unless if you're really strong, then doesn't matter. You can just like, power through people. But yeah, if you're close to the same level as the person you're competing against, then technique is going to be very important.
How interesting. There's just so much more strategy to it than one might think, an uneducated person like myself from the outside might think. Yeah. And you're pretty, as you said, you're pretty fresh into this world, which I didn't know, because obviously you've been in the grip, strength, and competition game for a long time. You've been a climber for a long time as well. We'll explore a lot of kind of the intersection of those two areas of expertise for you in this conversation here. But why the recent psych and kind of left turn over into arm wrestling?
Well, it all started with, I did this video with Magnus when he came to my place, and he brought in Devin Laratte, which is probably the most famous arm wrestler in the world. He's also like a world champion arm wrestler, like a huge guy. And obviously, I was always a fan of arm wrestling. I've been following it even since I was a kid. I used to be fascinated by it, but I never had any opportunity to train it or like know any club or where there was a table to practice or any of that stuff. So when I met him, that was really interesting to me. I was like, okay, this could be really fun. And he invited us at a practice at their club, the Ottawa High Hooker. And it's apparently like Ottawa's the mecca of arm wrestling. Like there's like so many great arm wrestler here. And it's kind of like the epicenter of arm wrestling in Canada and like one of the big ones in the world. So that was really interesting. So I started training that. And I just found it really interesting. It was like, and I think the appeal was it was not just a strength sport, but it was also very technical, which for me was interesting because like it's very complex. You have to learn like all the techniques and stuff. So I got into it right away. I thought it was really interesting. And then after that, one of my friends, and you probably heard of him, his name is Eric Roussin. So he's one of the big ambassador and organizer for grip competition, but also for arm wrestling competitions in Canada.
Right.
He runs like archive history too on like arm wrestling history and all that stuff. He was hosting the biggest arm wrestling competition in the country called the Ottawa Open that happens every year. And he says, you should go, you should sign up. There's like a novice category for people that have been doing it for a few years. I think it could be fun for you. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll try it. But yeah, I had like no experience. I showed up there with like 2 practices in and then didn't know what was going to happen. But yeah, it went well and it was really fun. So
do you run into other rock climbers at this kind of thing? What's the crossover? Because we see a lot of crossover between climbers and like Ninja Warriors, for example. How much crossover is there between rock climbers and arm wrestlers?
In common, I wouldn't say there's a lot of rock climber. Like at my gym, I didn't know anybody that did it. But when I started arm wrestling, I started an arm wrestling club at our gym. The owner is really open to any crazy ideas I always have. So he's like, yeah, go ahead. So a friend of mine made us a table too for the gym. And we got like 2 arm wrestling tables and we started hosting practices every week. And now a lot of the climbing community has been getting into it too. So a lot of people have been joining. Sometimes there's like 10, 15 people like coming in and trying. Like some people are just curious and want to learn about it. But yeah, I think it's going to be nice. And I think they go well together, like a lot of people that have similar interests and stuff. And yeah, they want to try it out. So I think it could be good. It could be good for the arm wrestling community and then for climbing as well. It brings in a lot of arm wrestler, which already have a lot of upper body strength and like, great tendons that are very developed. So I think it could be good for both sport. It's
so interesting. Well, I've definitely seen some of the videos that Magnus has done with Devin, and I've followed some of Devin's stuff as well. He's so engaging and his videos are great. And just, like he's got all these like wild homemade machines all strewn throughout his house. And he's, he's doing some sort of funky exercise, some of which I want to explore with you in this conversation. I think maybe a good way to try to tackle this, because it's just such a wide world, but also it's quite specific, like grip training compared to a lot of the stuff that I talk about on the show and that I do myself as a climber, which is like climber specific finger training. And maybe a good place for us to jump off is to try to get from your perspective a bit of a definition on what grip training is and how that differs from what we typically talk about here on The Struggle, which is a lot of like finger training. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's quite a bit of crossover there, or maybe they're, quite different, but because you have a foot in both worlds or an arm in both worlds, as it were, could you define those things for us?
One of the interesting I find with like climbing, arm wrestling, and like grip sport is they all have some element of grip involved, for me, grip is just like training your hand. There's different types of grip. There's like crushing grip, or like grippers, like there's pinch, tick bar, and then finger lifts that we do a lot in climbing. I think that's the one that we're very common to. But I think in climbing, there's so many hold type of variations, especially if you climb outside. Like there's so many type of holds that you're exposed to so many types of lift that I found it carries over really well. If you get into like arm lifting, then even if you don't have experience on all those specific little implements, I think you're going to do well on a lot of them. But for me, grip, it doesn't really matter, what type it is. It's for me, it's all there. All these sports have a specific grip, and I'll do grip in all of them. It's just the exercise are going to change depending on my goals. If I'm going to be focused a bit more on climbing, then obviously I'm going to work a bit more on on a hangboard or lifting from a block, or like doing a lot of board type climbing. If I'm doing it for grip, then I'm going to focus on those specific implements I'm going to have in comps. And then for arm wrestling, it's a little bit different. It's a lot of containment. So like the ability to hold on to your opponent. So it's a lot of it's a little similar to climbing in some ways, but it's kind of like the shape a little bit of like you have your hand like this, like type of cup position, and your fingers trying to open up. So like a lot of people, when they arm wrestle, they're going to try to attack your fingers, because usually that's the weakest link of the hand. So they'll try to open up and crack your fingers open and your wrist open. So it's the ability to contain that for them not to open you up.
This is where the climbing, that's your secret advantage here, is like they don't know that you're like, you can crush, full crimp on 6mm edges or 4mm edges, and they're trying to open your fingers up, and they're like, what the hell? Why does this guy have such strong fingers?
Yeah, but there's always different ways, like you can go around different ways. So usually if you're a climber, if you're coming into arm wrestling, you're going to have other type of weaknesses. Like usually like your pressure to the side is going to be a little bit weaker, and your pronation is going to be really weak. Unless you've been someone that's been working manually and like working wrenches or something like that, or all your life, that muscle is very undeveloped. For climbers, we don't usually do that rotation with the hand.
Right.
That rotation of the hand, when you're curling that person in, that's what usually like prevents that from curling you in. So that's kind of like your counter. So that needs to be really strong. So if you have a weak pronation, then they're going to attack your pronation. So they can go through that way, or like usually your side's a little bit weaker. So if you're a climber that is getting into arm wrestling, those are probably going to be your two biggest weaknesses.
Oh, I'm excited to explore that more, just out of like...
it's pretty interesting.
Like parlor trick, you're at the bar and somebody wants to arm wrestle. I kind of want to do like a little mini class on arm wrestling now, but we've got a lot of questions in just a whole area of subject matter to tackle, just in terms of grip strength and how it can apply to climbing, as this is a climbing show, and the audience that's listening right now predominantly are wanting to get stronger, more resilient, and improve in terms of their ability to climb, whether that's indoors or outdoors. And how much climbing are you doing these days, Yves?
Like last 4 months, I haven't climbed at all.
Wow.
The arm wrestling training is it's very physical. It takes, especially the table practice, takes quite a bit of time to recover. So I usually need at least 72 hours between those heavy practice time. Yeah. And you can't muscle wise, you're going to feel all right. But the tendons take time to recover. And if you have a practice too early, that's when you're going to have a lot of issues with we hear that all the time from arm wrestlers, like tendonitis type of stuff. So it's really hard. Even if you want to go on the climbing wall, it's very difficult unless it's going to be low intensity or something like that. But anything dynamic or you're gonna run into some trouble. So you need to allow yourself to recover properly. But this week I did. Actually, it was the first time that I climbed in 4 months. And I could still climb. I was actually pretty happy. We climbed on the spray wall with some friends yesterday. And I managed to send one of the projects that I had. I worked on it for a while too. I couldn't do it in the summer. I spent tons of time on it. Couldn't do it. And I got it second go. So yeah.
Wow, dude.
Good. Yeah.
Arm wrestling training.
Maybe that's
over.
what I tell them. Yeah.
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 Well, I'd love to just explore now, because you've got such a long lens on grip training as well as climbing specific. For those who are listening, and I would include myself in this bucket, we're kind of constantly looking at ways to train up our, typically we say finger strength, right? But I think what we're really talking about in the broader scope there is forearm flexors, grip strength, and oftentimes also endurance if we're doing longer sport climbs. And so like grip endurance as well. And so we tend to drop it into the bucket of like finger training and finger strength. And one of the questions that somebody wrote in here, their name is, well, they just put their initials, HR. And HR had this question: is hangboarding enough for climbers in order to develop the finger strength that we want in order to climb hard on boulders or routes? Or in your experience, Yves, does the hangboard only cover part of what we could actually be tackling as we're training up our grip and our finger strength for climbing? And what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, like for me, like almost before I started grip in 2018, all I did for climbing was hangboard and like climbing on a spray wall. Mm-hmm. So I think that's more than enough. Like you don't need to have like complex like equipment or anything like that to like, if you just have a hangboard, I mean, you can do a lot with that. And like, that's all I use. As long as I think what's important is like to set goals and stuff and like try to progress like through your progression as a grip athlete, not just like doing the same thing over and over again, but like try to work your way up. But yeah, that's all I used. Like I used like what I did. So I had an edge, like I started doing like one arm dead hangs on like a certain edge. And then I would add weight, and I would never add too much weight, as much weight as I needed till I could drop to the next hole down. And I would just do that. That's what I did for years and years. And that brought me, probably 95% of where I am now. Like, there's not much of a difference if I'm looking back at what I did like 10, 15 years ago to now. There's not that much of a difference. It's just the lifts are a bit different now. Like it's a bit more specialized for grip or on specific edge size. But other than that, then, when I look back at some of the stuff I did like 15 years ago, it would still hold up to what I do today. Yeah. And that's all I did before was hangboard, and then a lot of board climbing, like on a home board at home.
Right.
And that's important too, like in terms of like the technical aspect of it too, right?
Yeah, being able to apply the finger strength onto holds and body tension and position. And that's something that I talk often with when I'm speaking with coaches or athletes on here, which is like you can be piping strong in the gym, but if you're not really practicing the sport, there's going to be so much drop off in how it's applied. You're going to have essentially be filling up a leaky bucket. But for you, when you did branch out, so you were doing what sounds like a very simple, not easy, but pretty simple finger training routine for quite some time, climbing on hard problems and then training on a hangboard, doing, in your case, one arms until you could then progress to a smaller edge. For those who, like myself, can't do a one arm, you could either remove weight to do one arms or you could do two arm hangs with some weight, whatever it may be. But then you started branching out and you got psyched on grip training and grip sports and started working in some of these more specific exercises. And what were those? And can you reflect back and opine on whether any of those seem to have an outsized benefit in terms of filling in gaps that maybe you had on your more simple finger training for climbing? Yeah.
So whatever I did was always based on the competition that I was going to go through. So there's always very specific events, and it depends a little bit. Like if you do grip competition, like grip sport, they call it, it's going to be a little bit more strongman based, where it's always different. They always change the implementer. You're going to know like a little bit of time ahead, and then you don't have that too much time to prepare, but then you have to prepare on those. And
so is this like the Thomas inch or like a Rolling Thunder? Like
it can be. Some examples? There's pinch, and there's a big mix too. Like, like the grip sport, like if they want to see, or like when the comp is done, who's the best overall, who can do everything. So you're always going to have a mix of thick bars. So those are kind of like those thick handles, that rotating handle, and you're always going to have some sort of a pinch implement. You're going to have some small pinch or a finger, it looks like a nub, and it can be like a quarter. You're trying to lift like something like with something very tiny, like that's right. Common. Well, you'll see that. The finger ones, the one from climbing, are a little bit more uncommon. They're starting to get a bit more popular because climbers have become more and more interested, and they try to bring more and more climbing into it. And I think one of the ways to do that was like to bring lifts that climbers were really psyched on. So we start to see those a bit more now.
Would that be like an edge lift, like a block lift?
An edge lift, like, kind of like they call it a stirrup, but it's a lot like a tension block type of edge or something like that, but made of metal. Yeah, everything's made of metal usually in grip. So yeah, and then you're gonna have like grippers too are gonna be one of the others. Like crushing strength is gonna be one that's very popular.
That's where you're like just measuring how many pounds you can like squeeze, basically.
Yeah. So those are kind of like the main ones, but there's like some super niche stuff too, like the little anvils, or it can be like big blobs. It looks like a big block, like a pinch block, but like very wide.
Right. Well, I've seen some, like Emil Abrahamson did, this was like a strongman competition, but essentially they just had like a variety of different like boulders laying around that people had to try to find a way to pick up. But you're saying everything, is it more standardized in what you're doing? You're saying most of the implements are metal?
Yeah, most of them are metal. And then some of them are, like I said, like sometimes they're trying to branch out now to like attract people from other sport. So for us, they've been adding a lot of like fingertip lips or for climbers to get into, but it also attracts a lot of strongman. Like there's a big crossover in strongman. So if you have some of those comps, they're going to try to put a lot of axial lifts, like really heavy deadlifts. Like those can be like those like boulders or those Thomas Inch lift, but like increasing in weights, or like those blob lifts. Those will attract a lot of the strongmen because those are the type of lifts that I'll be really interested into.
And then, so when you reflect on that, so you basically went from hanging on a hangboard, like doing one arms on a hangboard, to now training the rotation, like kind of the rolling thunder, if you will, or wrist wrench type thing, to these big pinches, small pinches, the nubbins, like you're talking about, like lots of very specialized grips to be able to prepare yourself for this. Was there anything that you noticed that you were like particularly bad at that climbing wasn't preparing you for, and that when you trained it up, it helped you in other aspects of your finger strength?
There's two of them that kind of like stand out. One is the axle, which is like, looks like a deadlift bar, but it's going to be 2-inch. So that tends to be one of the ones that climbers tend to have a little bit more trouble, because you're going to have to deadlift like 400 pounds or something like that.
Is it rectangular or is it round?
It's round. So that one's an axle. Yeah. They use it a lot in strongman competition. But that one, like, you're going to have to lift a lot of weight. So you also have to have a decent deadlift. So that one's challenging if you're into it, not necessarily for the grip aspect, but more for the deadlift aspect. And then grippers, like climbers, again, most climbers, like you're usually a little bit smaller, lighter weight. So we have like smaller hands. So grippers, like it can be very challenging to set if they're quite wide, and like to set them and stuff like that. So if you have a really big hand, you can get it really deep in your hand and get a big mechanical advantage. So that one, hand size is going to matter. So that one was a little bit trickier for me too. There's a little bit more technique involved as well. So the learning curve's a bit longer. And then it's more for my body type, but like very wide pinch, like the blobs. Blobs are really hard for me because like I don't get much purchase. Like, like I'm just going to be on one finger joint on the other side. I don't have, my hands are not big enough for those type of lifts, but that's more specific to my size though.
Yeah, it seems in that sport in particular, and possibly in some aspects of climbing, but we're always talking about like ape index, right? In climbing, like, oh, they've got a +3, a +6. Yeah, but in grip sport, it sounds like whatever your hand index is. I've got really small hands. I'm 6 feet tall, but I've got like relatively speaking, very small hands. And I guess that serves me in some cases as a climber. If there's like a really thin hand jam, I can get in there, or a smaller edge because my fingers are smaller. And so maybe there's a slightly better mechanical advantage there. But for what you're talking about, like, I probably couldn't even span these blobs. Like I might not even be able to get my fingers around some of these. And then you get people like Devin or others that just have these giant mitts. It almost feels like there should be classes based on hand size.
Well, there's like weight classes. I guess that's the easiest one. But yeah, that's one of the debates a lot of people were having, like in grip, is like they should almost measure the hand size, should be kind of like instead of having weight class, should be like hand size, because the weight doesn't matter that much. Like, I mean, it's not going to be a big limiting factor in a lot of this stuff, because like other than the axle where you have to lift like tons of weight, like that's one of the beauties of this sport too, is like you can get into a strength sport without having to lift like crazy weights, it's very much safe too. It's all isometric, so it's very safe. You can do it at like a older age. It's a great sport to transition to, and it's one of the few sports I found that like especially with climbing, you can mix it with climbing and it doesn't really affect your performance too much. You can still do both of them at a really high level. So that's really hard to find in a sport.
Well, I want to touch on some of the specific types of stimuli that you mentioned there. We've talked about wrist flexion and extension strength kind of by comparison. Pronation and supination you've talked about. You just mentioned isometrics. There's also eccentrics, which we talk quite a bit about when we're talking about like hangs or heavy hangs and climbing. So I'd like to just go through some of these buckets if we could and get your insights for the listener. We can try to keep it in the kind of, I don't know, intermediate level, I guess, a beginner to intermediate. We can probably get into some more advanced things in a little bit as well. But let's break it down. Wrist flexion is one that you're very adept at and isn't something that I spend a lot of time thinking about because I don't climb a lot on slopers, but when I do, I usually get smacked down by them. But I could also see some real benefits, especially in modern setting in gyms. There's just a lot bigger volumes. It's no longer just climbing tiny edges overhung, on a kilter board or moon board. So when you're talking about wrist flexion, and then we can wrap extension into it as well, what are you doing to train that up, or what is maybe most advisable to climbers to be focusing on when training wrist flexion?
I don't know if it's a big performance indicator to have a great wrist flexion for climbing. Obviously, like the forearm flexor and like the fingers flexor probably serve a lot of dual purpose. So like if you have a very strong wrist, they probably carry over to some extent. So I could see that someone has very strong fingers. They're also going to have a very strong wrist flexion. You could see that's one of the things I've noticed from arm wrestling, because arm wrestling wrist flexion it's probably one of the most important things you can have. Is being able to bend your wrist in is like very important. And one thing you notice from good climbers is their wrists are very strong. Like they'll cup in really hard. So that's one thing that's very impressive. Like someone that never trained for arm wrestling or like doing wrist flexion specifically, their wrists are going to be very, very strong. That's one thing I've noticed quite a bit.
Let's peel back on that just a bit. So for climbers who do want to try to focus on that and build that up a little bit, maybe supplementary to climbing or being on a hangboard, is there one or two exercises or implements that you might suggest to be able to build up some wrist flexion?
That's something I've been diving quite a bit into since I've got to arm wrestling. So there's a lot of exercise you can do. I think one of the best one is either using a rotating handle or something like that with a loading pin, and then you put your arm up at an incline, like about a 45-degree incline, and then you just do kind of like your wrist curl with a tick bar. That's really good. And if you can get it at an incline too, you're always going to have the most load on the hand, as opposed to you see a lot of people doing wrist flexion like on a bench with a dumbbell or a barbell. But the thing is, like, it just takes you like a few millimeters to crack it, and then the bar just rolls in your hand. So it's not very effective way to do it. Another way that I really like to do it is to use just a PVC pipe, and then you just you could use bands, you could use a sling from climbing or something like that. So you attach it to a loading pin, or I think I put a video on Instagram recently on that. But like you put your hand through, you put the PVC pipe. That's a really good one. I think if I would do one for climbing, I would use kind of like a PVC that's like be like about like 3.5 or inch or something like that, something pretty wide. That's going to really, when it loads the wrist flexion too, and then like it's going to load right at the tip of your fingers. It's going to crack your fingers open. It's going to really open up your fingers. So that could be a one that's really interesting. Like if you can fight that opening and also always having the pressure towards your finger, a little bit like a sloper. That could be one that would carry over really well. Same with the wrist wrench. The difference with the wrist wrench is like the thumb's got, like you're going to have to contain it so it doesn't roll out of your hands, right? Because it wants to roll. So you're going to have to pinch it really hard. So it's almost like a pinch exercise, like the wrist wrench, a little bit of a pinch exercise. So you're squeezing really hard, and you're also trying to hold the wrist straight or the wrist bend so it doesn't crack you open, because the moment arm's a little bit on the outside of the center. That's why it works so well.
Right.
But what's nice is like, because the strap is behind your wrist, if some of you seen the video, the strap's going to be here, so you don't need to contain anymore with the thumb. You can put your thumb even on the other side here, but you're still going to have all the load on your fingertips where it wants to crack you open. So that's probably one that would be really good for climbers. And then if you wanted to train your slopers or even warming up, you could do it a band, but like do it almost like if you had like a loading pin from the floor, and you just try to keep your wrist straight. And then you could put like heavy load. But if you put heavy load, it's same thing. All the pressure is going to be in your fingers, and your wrist wants to crack you back. So as long as you could try to keep your wrist straight and your fingers straight, then it's going to put all the pressure in the fingertips, kind of like just like a little bit like a sloper.
Right.
That's very effective. And it's cheap too. You just need like, PVC pipe that's like about 6-inch long. Like you cut it with the saw. That'll cost you like $3 to make, put in your bag, super easy to carry. Great way to warm up your wrist, your, like, even if doing like rehabbing. I know a lot of people have like a lot of wrist problems now because of all the slopers and the coordination. You see more and more like TFCC type of stuff. Like, I know it's like becoming a plague in the youth circuit. You see all the kids with those little bands now. So it could be something interesting to add a lot of wrist strengthening exercise like that. I think if people do it though, to make sure they don't try to push those big PR, but doing a bit more, you know, high number reps, like 16, 20 reps or something, just like, you know, that'll probably be better. Yeah, because that joint, man, there's so many things going on there too. Like it's so easy to get it injured. Like there's so many tendon, ligaments and all that stuff going through there. So yeah.
Yeah. And as climbers, we're always wanting to try to push it in PR. And so it puts us at risk of some sort of overuse or just novel movement injury. And by the way, for those who are listening right now, I'm going to be posting the video of this conversation over on Patreon so that you'll be able to see, because Yves is like showing different wrist positions and kind of movements and all that, which could be quite helpful for you if you're just listening to the audio version of this right now. And I'll also link, I did see that you posted quite recently a video of what you were just talking about, the PVC pipe with like the band that kind of goes over and it puts your arm and your kind of wrist in this position to make that exercise be quite efficient and optimized and very cheap, as you said, just a few dollars to be able to put that together. So I'll link to that video for those. You can just check your show notes to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's great too for warming up in the, like if you're like in a comp or at the crag, you can just put an elastic band, attach it to a tree and have the same setup and just kind of like curl in. It's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And just so we understand kind of the difference in what is being focused on there in terms of like the anatomy of the arm. I would typically warm up with like an edge. So I'll have, you know, an unlevel edge or a 20 millimeter stone edge or something like that. And I'll have it either on a band or using like a force gauge, like the force board. And so I'll do some like overcoming isometric kind of finger curls into that as my warm up. What you're talking about here is it's a more open hand. It's more focused on flexion than on fingers, right? And I guess they're all kind of interconnected in a way, but it's just focusing a little bit on a slightly different system.
Yeah, it's going to be a wrist flexion, but all the pressure is going to be through the fingers. So all the way at the end of your fingertip. So you're flexing at the wrist, but you initiate the movement always through the fingers. So you're kind of like pushing through the fingers and rolling like that. So it's nice because it'll get you like everything nice and warmed up and feel like nice and loose too. So that could be one that'd be interesting for climbers, either for rehabbing or like strengthening your wrist. And then same thing, if you want a PR, you can do like a 8 rep PR or 10 rep PR. You can track those instead of doing like those really heavy lifts.
I want to try an experiment on myself here. So if I make one of these out of a PVC pipe and I set it up how you showed me on the video, and my goal is to do, 8 rep max, how much could I gain? Or what improvement would I want to be looking at over the course of? All right, y'all, that seems like a good place here to do this fade out on your free intro of this Pro Clinic with Yves Gravelle. And man, does he just keep bringing the goods as we continue in the full episode of this Pro Clinic. So if you want to join up for a free trial or just support me by becoming a Patreon or Apple subscriber member for a month, this is what you're going to get in the rest of this, like the extra hour or so of this conversation that we have with Yves. He talks about eccentric versus isometric training. So a lot of attention's been put on that. Like, are we just hanging or are we actively curling into an edge or a hangboard? He gives his thoughts on that. You guys hear my phone right there? That was my wife telling me it's time to pick up my daughter from school. All right, Ryan, let's cook through this outro. What else do we talk about? Oh, joint angle variety. This was very interesting to me because I very often just train on a half crimp, and he talked about the importance of joint angle variety and how he works that into his grip training and finger training routine. We talk about when he trains his fingers, before or after climbing, minimal edge versus heavier hangs, and a bit of a hot take on that one and what he finds has worked for him. How to train towards one-arm hangs. That's something I'm doing right now, one-arm dead hang training. I'm removing weight, but he adds some context to that. He talks about whether weaker climbers are better climbers, another hot take, and grip training and how we can continue to improve in our 50s, 60s, and 70s. Grip sport's crazy. I'm really excited. Like, Yves isn't even peaking, and he's been doing this for a long time. And then at the end, he gets very specific and he shares 2 new exercises that we busy climbers could easily add to our routine that only take like 10 minutes and that he thinks could be difference makers in addition to like what we're already doing with our climbing and like hangboard training. So all of that is in there. And it's free if you want to sign up for a 7-day free trial over on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show. Wherever you are listening to this right now, I will have a link to that. So it's very, very easy. You can get a free trial, listen to this episode, dip into a bunch of the other pro clinics that we've done and bonus episodes with all these big name athletes and coaches that have been on the show. And then if you don't like it, you can quit. You can quit before the trial's over and then you just like listen for free, or if you've got it in you to support me a little bit, you could stick around for a month or 2. And I'm really psyched that you're here. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. I hope this episode and the others that I make have been helpful for you. And if you've got any thoughts or any questions, please feel free to reach out. I am here for you like you are here for me. I hope you all are getting after it and having a wonderful, wonderful day. I'll see you soon.